quick recap. We are in Section 2, the Republic of Rome. We're covering the years of 509 BC to 30 BC. We are right here in Chapter 4 under this section at 390 BC. We are starting with the Gallic invasion. Now the Gauls, as the Romans referred to them, but they're Celts. Celts and Gauls are the same thing. The Romans just called them Gauls. They had migrated into the northern Italian area around the 4th century, and the buffer state between Rome and the Gauls were the Etruscans, but we've already seen how they are getting taken over, so it was only a matter of time before the Celts and the Romans met. Now, the Gauls were 6 feet tall, mostly blonde, blue-eyed warriors, and they wore ornaments on their helmets, and they spiked and colored their hair, and they made war cries. So all of this was a fearsome sight. The Romans on average was 5'2", Julius Caesar was 5'6", and he was considered tall for a Roman. The Romans basically thought of them as brutish drunkards who loved to fight with a low intellect. So they had this opinion of them, but they were a fearsome sight when you saw them all arrayed and drawn up for battle. So as the Celts settled into the Po Valley area in northern Italy, they came upon the Etruscan civilization, and as they were declining, they were actually a buffer state between Rome and the Celts, but as they were declining, the Celts had sent several tribes into their area. When the Celts came upon the Etruscan city of Colosseum, Colosseum asked Rome for help against the Celts. So the Romans sent a little skirmishing force and delegates out there to meet with the Celts, and the Romans came under a banner of truce, which the Celts recognized, and they sat down, but some brawl or a fight broke out, and a Roman magistrate actually killed a Celtic chieftain, and this didn't set well with the Gauls, and they wanted compensation and payment for it, and the Romans didn't do it, and so the Gauls wiped out the entire skirmishing force. Then another tribe, the ones called the Senones, under a leader called Brennus, they moved back across the Apennine Mountains to the east side, then swung back west and headed straight for Rome. And the Romans met them at the confluence of the Tiber and the Allia River for their first major engagement. This would be the spot here of the Battle of Allia, and of course there's no river anymore, but this is where it would take place. Now, the records of this battle only comes from 2 accounts, and of course we use Livy, and he doesn't even give a size of the force, but we believe the Celts had about 20,000 men, maybe a little more, 25. The Romans probably had about 15, and the consul Quintus Sulpicius, the Romans didn't think much of the Celt. They didn't think they were capable of much, but the Celts quickly turned the Roman right wing, and then most of the Romans on the rest of the line, when they saw this happen, they, not even waiting for the barbarians to be upon them, just turned around and started running. So the whole army started running. Now at this point, the Romans, the soldiers, where'd you think they would run to? You'd think they'd run to Rome, but they didn't. They ran to the city of Veii. Now, most of the Roman soldiers, if you've been watching other videos, were most likely plebeians. And there's been a political battle between the plebeian assembly, the tribunal wanting to move their capital to Veii, and the patricians wanting to stay in Rome. So I believe that's why the plebeians just took off to Veii. So there's nobody in Rome. So Brennus heads to Rome, and he sacks the capital. Now there's different accounts of what happened here at this time, but this is what I believe probably took place most likely. Brennus cannot get into the capital area, which is on Capitoline Hill. where the administrative buildings, the Senate is, he can't get into that. The barbarians didn't bring siege equipment. They didn't carry them. They'd never done that hardly. They wouldn't lay siege to a city, a walled city, for a long time. And 7 months they spent in Rome sacking it. They sacked the surrounding areas. And I believe what was happening was the food was becoming scarce. You couldn't feed everybody in Rome. And the Celts were being affected with dysentery. So Brennus decides to leave Rome. And he demands a payment of 1,000 pounds to leave. Well, the Romans agree to it. And this brings us to Roman rule number 4. If you can't beat your enemy, buy him. And the Romans will live by this rule throughout their history. And the Roman treasury doesn't have enough money to pay this. The magistrate, the patrician class, has to put up the money. So they put up all the money. And as they're weighing out the money on the scales, this is a famous painting on Camillus' story in Florence. The Roman magistrates accuse Brennus of using, weighted counters to weigh the scales. And Brennus throws his sword on the scale and says, "Woe to the vanquished." At this time, Camillus had showed up. Camillus, he was gathering veterans. He was exiled or retired. And he gathered about 12,000 to 15,000 veterans that had retired also, and he shows up in Rome, and he sees what's happening here, and he throws his sword on the scale, and he says Rome will be saved by the forged steel. And the two sides start fighting. Well, the fighting is hard in the streets. There's not room to fight, and night is coming, and the two sides decide to stop fighting and fight the next day outside the city. We're not sure the exact years. There's different accounts, but we believe it's somewhere between 390 and 389, or 390 and 387. So somewhere in there. So outside the city, they do battle, and Camillus routs Brennus. And Camillus is now, remember, he was exiled and not looked good upon recently for recent events, and he's dubbed the second founder of Rome, after Romulus. And everybody loves him. He has another triumph in Rome. And this is the time that Camillus reforms the Roman army. It takes a while for the Romans to get used to the new way of fighting, but he does this after this. And the Roman battle record now improves to 6-2 for open field, pitched battles. But that ends our chapter 4. Now this subheading under our Republic of Rome, I call the wars in Italy. And you might say to yourself, well, haven't we been fighting in Italy? Yes, but what we've been seeing previously is just Rome trying to survive. Because remember, after the Etruscan domination, Rome got its city back, and then it had to fight off, the Volsci, Aqui, Sabines, Etruscans, Celts. It was just fighting for survival. At this point, it has managed to survive, and now we move into a new phase, the Republic Wars in Italy. That's what this next section is called, and we're doing this to keep this all compartmentalized. And we pretty much end off, 389, 387, where the Celts had stopped. So we keep this going in a pretty fluid order here. So chapter 1 in the Republic Wars in Italy section, the Latin Wars, and that's what we'll be looking at here. Now, if you recall, the Latins and the Hernici people, they had allied themselves with Rome, but they took advantage of Rome's disunity and Rome's sack by the Celts, and they broke their alliance with Rome. So after the Romans dealt with the Celts, The Latium area became a series of wars and treaties and wars and treaties with Latium cities up until around 377. So from 387 to 377. So for about 10 years this stuff goes on. So what had taken place, what was happening right now is the Volsci were threatening Rome. So the consular tribunes marched out and they made camp at Mount Marcius. But the camp was attacked and besieged by the Volsci. So what did the patricians do again in the time of crisis? They called on Camillus. And Camillus would, they offered him tribune, but he wouldn't do it for nothing less than dictatorship. And they gave it to him, and he took it, and he started to fight in the Latin Wars. Now, most of the fighting in the Latin Wars was done in the Poptina region. Down here, you see it at the bottom. Now, his first battle was at Machaeum, where the Romans were besieged. What Camillus did was he marched and he went outside the city where the besiegers were, and he set up his camp there. The Volsci did not want to be caught between Camillus's force and the Romans inside Machaeum. So they withdrew, and they withdrew inside their camp. Remember, I told you a lot of battles were maneuvering, going in defensive positions. It's tough to assault an armed camp and a fortified city, and so that's where the Volsci went. But what Camillus did was he first attacked the Volsci camp with fire darts, fire arrows, because he knew that in the morning in this region a favorable wind would always be blowing coming in from the coast toward this area. And so he sent in the fire darts first thing in the morning, and it just burnt the city down. The Volsci had to come out of the city, and then when they done that, Camillus then secondly attacked and slaughtered them. So that was a good pitched victory for Camillus. 2 years later, in 387 BC, right here at the city of Satricum, Camillus met the Volsci, the Henrici, and the Latins here. Now at first, the Romans were daunted at the size of this army arrayed against them, but Camillus made a rousing speech and threw the army standard out in front of the Romans toward the enemy. And this inspired the Romans, because the Roman standard, you were embarrassed and you would be deemed losers and cowards if you let your standard fall in the enemy's hands. So he did this, and then the Romans charged and routed the enemy. He then laid siege works to the city, but the siege works were disrupted by sorties, and so he was forced to storm the city, in which he did. The Romans then stormed the city and took it. Another rousing victory for Camillus. So the following year, Livy goes on to tell how Camillus went into this Etruscan area to the north of Rome now, and the Etruscan cities of Suturium and Nepeta were rising up against Rome, and the Aequi also. And Camillus won some great victories. He won so much wealth that he paid back the patricians, remember, who used their wealth 4 years ago to pay off the Celts. Now I'm sure most of these accounts are exaggerated, so I'm not going to go into them, but at the very least he was up there subduing the Etruscans. So I give Camillus another victory for subduing the Etruscans in the Aequi in this area. So back in the southern part at Satricum, the Volsci retook that city. So Cornelius Cassus and Quintus Capitolinus took over the war against the Volsci while Camillus was dealing with the Etruscans. And the amazing thing here, the records state that the Volsci had charged the Romans, and Cornelius ordered his men to stand and take the charge, in which they did. So after they absorbed the charge, the cavalry, the Roman cavalry under Quintus, charged the enemy, broke and panicked them. And the Romans then retook Satricum, and they colonized city with 2,000 Romans. And that brings us to rule number 5. If you can't force them out, breed them out. And the Romans will colonize everywhere they go and every land they conquer. In 381 BC, there was another battle. The Volsci again retook Satricum and slaughtered the Roman citizens there. Now, Camillus is recorded as being elected consul a 6th time in that year. His fellow consul, a younger Lucius Furius, set about straightway to fight the enemy with 4 legions, but the much older Camillus advised against it. Furius, claiming Camillus was too old and not wanting to fight, attacked the larger Volsci force, while Camillus stayed in camp with his smaller force. Now, as the Volscis were being rushed by the Romans, they retired up a hill where there were some more Volsci units hiding. And as the Romans advanced up the hill, the hidden Volsci then fell upon the Romans, and the Romans started to retreat. The Romans were losing this battle as Camillus was watching. So he came out, he ordered the men to stop running, and then the army turned around and routed the enemy. So that's the kind of prestige that Camillus had at this time. I mean, the men just followed him anywhere, and he won another victory. Now, the last 3 years from about 380 to 377 was last of the first Latin wars now. They've been going on for 12 years, and the Volsci and the Latin forces, they raided Roman territory, which resulted in 2 Roman armies sacking Antium. And then they went and burned the whole city of Satrium down. At this point, the Latin culture found that they were being threatened from the Volsci, the Aqui, the Etruscans, whatever's left of the Sabines, enough to force them to ally with Rome. So this ended the First Latin War, and they became allies with Rome again. And Camillus' last exploit was capturing the city of Volterrae. He died of a plague in 365. Marcus Furius Camillus' record was 6-0 in major pitched battles or campaigns. Now, we come to our next hero, and that's the only reason why I record these next ones, because something's important, because we come to our friends again, the Celts, because since the Celts lost their battle, 30 years ago, because remember, we're around 377 right now. They lost their battle. They've been raiding outlying provinces all over Italy. They even gone as far as Sicily. Well, as they were coming back up, the Romans met them by the city of Tibur at the Anio River in 361. And the Celts were often allying themselves with other city-states against Rome. So Rome really wanted to get the Celts out of here. And so they met here, and there was a skirmishing going on, until a Gaul of enormous size, he walked on the bridge by the river, and he challenged any Roman to fight him to end this stalemate that was going on. A tribune, lower-ranking officer, Titus Manlius, who was much smaller and wore lighter armor, walked up and defeated the Gaul. And Titus Manlius was given the surname Torquatus for defeating the Gaul, and he was made consul 3 times, and he became dictator 3 times. So he's another hero of Rome in the early days. So Rome, I give Rome a victory here at the Anio River, because this starts the Celts' downfall and getting them out of Italy. And it recognizes Titus as another hero. Now, the Anio battle was in 361. A few years later, in 358 and 357, the Celts were still threatening the Latium area, so a combined Latin and Roman army had defeated them. And what happened here, the significance was that Rome settled the colony in Latium. Now, the Latium city-states were not too pleased that Rome had settled a city there, but with Romans, but there's not much they can do with the threats that were happening to them. They needed Rome. Now, the Gauls, after this battle, after this defeat, they actually went back to the Po Valley, so they were more in the north now, and they weren't running around Latium. And so what happens when the Latians feel that they're not being threatened? The Rome and the Latins start fighting again. And the Romans end up capturing Privernum. And then from here, there was one last Latium war, and this pretty much ends our Latium wars. This happened from 340 to 338 BC. And this last Latium war actually took place when the first Samnite war started. Because look, again, same thing that happened with the Celts and the Romans. The Etruscans up here, remember I was talking about, they were on a decline, and they were buffer state between the two opponents. Well, once the buffer state's gone, they come to war. Well, the same thing happened here in the south. Once Latium was controlled by Rome, well, now the buffer state between the Samnites and the Romans are gone, and now they're going to clash. So a war actually starts with them in 343. But the last Latium war is when Rome had marched down into Campania plains area, the valleys. Remember, the valleys were always being fought for. I said that in the first video. Rich areas. They marched down there and they occupied Capua. Well, Rome claimed sole honors for achieving this Capua and conquering this area, and didn't give the Latins any credit. Well, this pissed off the Latins, and they revolted against the domineering Romans, you know. So for 3 years, the Romans and the Latins fought again. Now finally, Titus Manilius won a decisive battle and defeated the Latin League and the Volsci who were helping him at the city of Tryphanum. And this is another victory for the Roman army. And now, at this time, Rome controls all of Latium. And Rome was expanding now all over central Italy. The Roman battle records improved to 14-2 after fighting the Celts in the Latin wars here. So remember, they are reorganizing and improving on their tactics, especially after Camillus. So they're still working on that. But you know, the Romans are nothing if innovative, and I'm not saying their opponents weren't as good, but the Romans were drilling, practicing, and constantly training to improve on these tactics that Camillus has set down. I don't think their opponents in Latin and anywhere else in Italy was really doing that. So that could account for a lot of Rome's victories, I'm sure. And then that brings us to chapter 2 under Wars in Italy for the Republic. And it's going to be the Samnite Wars now, because remember, their borders have now come together. Now the Samnite Wars took place between 343 and 290 BC. There was 3 wars, and it was mainly fought in this area in the Campanian plains. They fought over the rich plain area there. And there was 4 major engagements in these 3 wars. The first war had no real battles, and it was inconclusive. However, there was a second war, and there was 2 battles fought. The first was at Caudine Forks in 321 BC. It was invoked their rule where they divide and conquer, and they were going to try to make allies with in the Apulia region, the Lucanias, on the eastern side of the Samnite territory. You can see Lucera over there. So the Romans were going to make contact there and move across to Lucera. And the Samnites blocked the way, did a couple things. First, they blocked the route from Rome south to Fregelia. Then the Romans moved out with a large force under the consuls Postumus and Titus Veturius, and they moved eastward because they were in the Capua plains area there, and they were going to move to Lucera. But they were trapped by Pontius in the narrow Apennine mountain pass at Caudine Forks. Now, instead of fighting the Romans, they surrendered to Pontius because they were ambushed and surrounded in this narrow pass. Then they were marched out under yoke, and the humiliation, Rome always remembered it. The defeat hastened the evolution of the Roman military organization. Remember, Camillus had put something in place, and it takes time, and they're learning it, they're training, and they really hastened it after this battle, but the Romans lost this one. Now, in the meantime, the Samnites besieged Fregelia, but by 318, Rome was regaining their strength and learning the Camillus manipular system very well, and seized most of the Campanian plains, and they raised the siege at Fregelia. Now, the second battle in the Second Samnite War was in 305, was the siege of Bovianum. Most of the central Italian states had sided with the Samnites, except Apulia and Lucania. However, the growing power of the legion formation enabled the Romans to subdue their foes one by one. Another factor was that a war fleet was developed in 312. This was the first time that Rome had assembled a fleet. It consisted of about 20 triremes. That means there's 3 banks of oars. And a normal complement of men would be around 200, with about 140 up to 170 of them being oarsmen. Also, Appius Claudius began the construction of the Great Via Appian Way, which linked Rome to its conquest in the south, which leads us to Roman rule number 6. All roads must lead to Rome. Romans were constructing roads to allow them to reach their conquered territory and to control them easier. In 305, the Romans reached the great city of Bovianum and laid siege. To relieve the city, the Samnite commander Statius Gellius brought up a relief force. Titus Minicus crushed the relief force but was killed in the fray. This defeat of the Samnites destroyed the power of the Samnites, and they sued for peace the following year. Rome now had hegemony over Campania. Now the Third Samnite War starts when the Lucanians, the Etruscans, the Gauls, and Samnites all joined forces under Gellius Equatus to create a hostile ring around Rome. 2 legions under Lucius Scipio were sent to hold a pass northeast in the Apennines through which the Gauls were believed to come through. Here Scipio was attacked by the combined forces in 298 at Camerinum and was badly defeated, and 1 legion was cut to pieces. So we got another loss for the Roman army here. Now, despite this setback, the Romans still carried the war to the enemy. Quintus Fabius Maximus with 5 legions. He went across the Apennines to the town of Sentinum. It was about 35 miles inland from the Adriatic Sea. Now the war chariots of the Gauls gave the coalition an advantage against the Roman left wing, but on the right the Samnites were driven back, enabling Fabius to attack the Gauls in their flank. After a savage struggle, the line collapsed, giving Rome complete victory. The Romans had lost 8,200 men, but they killed about 25,000, including Equatus, the leader of this uprising. Samnium accepted peace as an autonomous ally. Only the Gauls and the Etruscans stood in the way of total Roman supremacy in all of central Italy. Now the Battle of Sentinum was in 295. At 283, 13 years later, at Vandemonian Lake, despite being defeated, the Etruscans and Gauls continued to harass Rome's efforts to extend their northern borders. A Roman legion under Publius Cornelius at Dolabella encountered the combined force near Vandemonian Lake on the Tiber. Dolabella caught the Etruscans as they were crossing the river and annihilated their last army. He then fell upon the Gauls and put them to flight with heavy losses. This ended the last resistance in central Italy. Rome's battle record improves to 17-4. And now that the buffer state of the Samnites is gone, this brings the Romans in contact with the Greek city-states in Lower Italy, and which brings in a new invasion of the Italian peninsula by the Greeks. and that'll be chapter 3, and we'll cover that in our next video. So you can see here the Romans have went from conquering the Latins in this area to conquering the Samnites and taking all of this, and then actually controlling the Etruscan territory now up to the northern area. So they control all the central Italy now, and it is 280 BC.